across a variety of sectors, so from financial services, consumer, retail, industrials, energy, and also across the public sector in the UK and in Europe, and as well as with corporates and public sector with startups as well. And we're very interested in operating model design as a concept and an approach to help strategy execution, particularly over the last 15 years or so. And as well as my consulting work, that's included working with Ashridge Business School. So I partnered with one of the academics there to set up a program around operating model design. And later we co-authored a book called The Operating Model Canvas. And that book's very focused on practice. So my collaboration with the academic was about putting practice into theory and then making it more teachable. So I now spend my time as an independent consultant, an advisor, and coach, and doing things like the workshop next week. So helping build capability in others to help organisations be more effective, which is really what my passion is. So you'll have seen from the promotion for the event, it's very much about building an operating model that can align and help delivery of your strategy. That's clearly important in a world of change. And I have a personal view from experience that you can't choose between strategy and execution. You have to think about the two hand in hand. An operating model is really a bridge between those two worlds. So the intent of the workshop is to give you some concepts and, more importantly, some practical tools about how to align strategy and operations, to give you a framework and a set of practical tools to design operating models. So take strategy, decode it, think about what it means. So very much that transition from strategy to design to implementation, and to make sure that the organisation's focused on customers and creating value for customers, and that being a key way of translating strategy effectively into effective operating models. So that's the brief at a high level. As I said, we'll spend about 20 minutes or so just giving you a flavour of why operating models are needed and the type of ideas and tools that we'd explore in the 2 days. So firstly, if strategy can't be executed, then it's not worth the paper it's written on. And unfortunately, many strategies are very weak on the how of how they're going to be delivered. So I'm a big fan of Roger Martin as a strategist. So he's my go-to strategist on a number of topics. So this model here is his strategy cascade, which talks about the 5 things to think about in doing effective strategy. So setting a winning aspiration, working out where to play in the market, so choice of market. Thirdly, being clear on how to win. So how do you create compelling value propositions for customers which are better than competitors? Fourthly, what are the capabilities, particularly the must-have capabilities that will be essential to allow you to win in the market? And then what's the management systems in place to organise and be effective operationally? And you'll see that they're all interdependent, and that's an important message from this. And typically, strategy and strategy teams focus on the first 3 boxes of those, and do strategic market analysis and customer segmentation and value, and then have less to say about the how of strategy execution, which is really about ensuring the right capabilities are in place to deliver the value propositions that can win in the market, and ensuring that the right management systems are in place. So for me, you'll see when we get into the detail, operating model designs more focused on those last three, but has to decode and translate choices around where to play in the market and what the basis of winning customers is. And if we look at common causes of strategy execution failure, we often see the first one, that there's an unclear logic for how value will be created and how the business design supports that. Secondly, we often see that the capabilities required to create and deliver and capture value are not clearly defined, or more importantly, and more often not prioritized. So all capabilities become seen as equally important, and that's not the case. There will be some which are more important. Thirdly, then we often see that the scale of change that's needed to support the strategy and to prioritize the right capabilities sometimes isn't understood. So ways of working are not redesigned. Teams within organizations assume that they can stretch their existing ways of working and workflows rather than radically rethinking them. Fourthly, then there can be a lack of clarity on decision rights and accountability for outcomes and for delivery outputs. Fifthly, then we can see incentives and motivations that aren't aligned. So how do you make sure that the reward systems, that the targets, the OKRs and KPIs that are set, how do you make sure that those are changed to reflect the new strategy, to reflect how value gets created for customers, and then are prioritized within the performance systems. Number 6 then is this idea of integration, which gets into things like systems thinking. So how do you think about the whole rather than just the parts? And that's both within what I call components. So how do you make sure that choices around technology systems, around people, around data and structure are all aligned and reinforcing? But equally, how do you make sure that choices within business functions are integrated and aligned as well? So what finance does, what HR does, what procurement does, what operations does, and sales. How do you make sure they're all focused on the way of winning in the market and creating value? And lastly, what we often see then is when there hasn't been this step of thinking through the implications of the strategy on the operating model, then the leadership team can come away with different views of how they think strategy will be executed and be successful. So they can be aligned on the what, but not on the how. And then, as you can imagine, that cascades down into the organization in terms of how decisions are made and how they operate. So there's 7 common issues, common causes that we see that result in poor strategy execution, and are things that operating model design can help address, and therefore reduce the risk of strategy execution failure and give you more confidence that the strategy can be delivered. So what is an operating model? In its simplest form, it's a visualization, it's a model or a representation that explains how the organization operates to deliver value to its customers or its beneficiaries. So if it works in the public sector, it might have stakeholders or beneficiaries as opposed to fee-paying customers. But it's all about understanding the value for them and understanding how the organisation is going to deliver those. So we can think about it as being this bridge, so a bridge between what strategy intends and how we deliver it, how the operation is going to deliver it. We can think about it as being focused on value delivery. So let's be clear on the work that delivers value rather than just what it promises and rather than just what's all the work we need to do just to run the organisation. Thirdly, we can think about it as a system, so a system of different components and how they work together and what the relationships are. So how do we make sure that the relationships are reinforcing rather than conflicting? And then lastly, we can recognise that it's dynamic. So there are some things that we will decide, so big decisions that have consequences. There will be more detailed things that we will leave space for them to flex, and we'll need to revisit the operating model over time as circumstances change and as we learn. So how do we think then about an operating model? So there's various models out there. So these are some of the common ones that people are quite often familiar with. So the Galbraith star model, quite often discussed more in organisation design, but it covers the same aspects that we would expect in an operating model. And I think there's a more recent version of it now that has capabilities as a 6 box, so where strategy is replaced by capabilities and strategy above that. So a kind of capability lens on it. The McKinsey 7S model, again, it's been around for a long time. The Nadler and Tushman congruence model, again, sort of a similar set of core elements in the operating model. So work or processes, people, formal organisation and structure, or the informal organisation, and then the kind of inputs and outputs to it. There's a similar model from Bain, and then the last two here come more out of the IT world, so enterprise architecture and business architecture, where those disciplines have had to lean in to concepts like business model and operating model in order to more effectively understand business requirements and understand how they make the right choices around system design and architecture. The model that I will use in the 2 days is this model, the operating model canvas, which is something that I helped develop along with Andrew Campbell and Michael Gutierrez at Ashridge. In some ways similar to some of those other models, but there's also a difference as well. So you'll see this very clear focus on the customer and the beneficiary, or customer, the beneficiary, and the value proposition as really the focus of the operating model. And then really a first step around understanding the value delivery chain or the value chain. So what are the key steps or work that needs to be done that create the value for customers? And then through that, we can look at it through lenses such as suppliers, location, organisation, and information, and the management system going around it. And as there's other models showed, these things are interrelated. So I think that the point of difference here is the focus on customer value proposition as opposed to strategy as a higher level concept or capability. So just to round what I've been saying up, so why do you need an operating model? So often strategy doesn't say much about the how, and that's quite often where strategies fail. So an operating model converts strategy into a view of the how it will work. Secondly, managers and even executives quite often have different understandings of what is needed to implement the strategy, often influenced by very different functional perspectives. So if you sit in HR, how you think about the world and view it is different than how you think about it in IT or procurement or sales or marketing. So part of an operating model is to create a shared view of how value is created, that each of those functional leads and functional managers can understand and then translate into their functional strategies and functional operating models. So that shared understanding is really important. I'll talk in a minute about how you go about creating that. Thirdly, an operating model becomes a powerful way of communicating the strategy down to people throughout the organization. You might be closer to the shop floor or the factory floor, so you can start to explain what the strategy practically means for them and the work that they do and the team that they work in. And lastly, strategies are often unrealistic about what is possible. So by going through a high-level operating model process, it can give you some feedback into the deliverability of the strategy, and some to and fro to recalibrate where necessary to make sure that it's a strategy that can be delivered and is executable. So as an analogy, we can think about operating model design in the way that an architect might design a building. So if they were going through that process, they'd think about the way the building is going to be used, where it's located and how it relates to the environment it sits in, how it's going to be constructed, right through down to the infrastructure, so the electrics, the plumbing, the heating, the lighting, and how it uses energy. So it's the same with operating models. So when all those aspects come together and fit and are aligned and integrated, it works better. So I'm going to say a few words then about the design part of operating model design. So we often focus on the frameworks around operating model, but part of the 2-day program will be to help you become more effective operating model designers. And it's important to think about what being a designer is. So I've, over the last 15 years or so, been very interested in design thinking as a discipline. So design thinking is the introduction of design methods and design culture into new fields such as business innovation. So you'll see this picture on the bottom left here. When we talk about design thinking, it's a blend of analytical thinking, critical thinking, but also intuitive or creative thinking. And given the complexity of topics like operating model design, we have to have some intuitive and creative thinking to navigate that problem space. It doesn't mean that we can't come back and do the analytical thinking to make sure the detail is there, but there's times when we have to make creative jumps to explore ideas and see what solutions might be. And the right-hand image of this slide talks about the IDEO DDFR framework. So they used to have a 3-segment model, but this looks at what is viable from a business perspective. So does it commercially make sense? What is feasible from a technology perspective and also an organization perspective? Thirdly, what is desirable from a customer perspective? And then this 4th bubble being around what is responsible, and that's thinking about the broader responsibility to sort of people and planet and the environment. And the idea of that is it's the intersection between those four domains where business innovation happens. And when we talk about the process of design, so going through a operating model design process and working with a team, taking a team through it, we need to recognize that the process is not and does not feel linear. So particularly at the early stages of projects like this, it feels quite messy in terms of trying to make sense, to frame what's important, to frame the problem, and start to come up with some insights and ideas. And as you go through that design process, you start to get some clarity and can be more structured in the thinking and putting solutions on the table. And we ultimately get to a point where we've got all that structure in place and can articulate a strong and well-argued business case. But the point of showing this is, in my experience, particularly actually with senior teams who are used to working in an analytical and critical mode of thinking, going through a process like this, which at times at the start can feel quite messy, and sometimes feel like they explore thoughts or ideas that get thrown away, it's quite a different way of working. So there's a need to, as a practitioner, to understand that within yourself, and then secondly, to be able to lead a team through some of that ambiguity and complexity to get to a point where there's a clear operating model design going forward. And again, in the workshop, we can get into some practical ways of doing that, which I've experimented with and learned to use over the last 15 years. So that's some of the starter content. The more detailed agenda is going to look like this. So some introduction, a bit of an exploration, so a bit more detail on what I've talked about now in terms of why strategy execution fails and what an operating model is. And then the core of the workshop is going to be around how to decode strategy, how to define value chain maps focused on value propositions for customers, and to create then the underpinning logic for operating models. A bit more about design thinking. Then in day 2, moving into organization mapping. And again, there's some nuances there, which I'll highlight in a minute. Leaning into governance and decision making. We'll cover a bit around people, IT, and locations and suppliers, but probably not in the same depth. And then thinking about, well, how do we then test once we've got some ideas around the operating model? There's a sort of iterative testing processes, some different ways of testing and evaluating. Is it going to be a good operating model? I'll talk then about some practical hints and tips and approaches and plans for how you set up and run operating model projects. And then we'll kind of share some real world insights as well. Some which we'll do throughout the 2 days, but really a chance to open up and cover any questions that mightn't have been covered over the previous sessions. And where I'm trying to get you to is this idea of being an operating model design practitioner. And to do that, so there's some methodology things. So there's the framework. So the operating model canvas I talked about, it's a high level framework. There's a toolkit. So I'll show you a little bit more on that in a minute. There's an approach for how you get from start to end. So there's some of those tangible things. Secondly, there's this mindset. So how do I think like a designer, not just an analyst, because that's super important. And then thirdly, how do I get some of the practical application? So operating model design is quite a practical subject. So some of that will be through opportunities to practice some of the key tools as we go through those 2 days. Some of it will be sharing some of my experiences and case studies. I suspect there'll also be experiences in the room which we can share and explore as well. And just pick up on two things from this. So in terms of an approach, this is a very simplistic view of it, but really starts with value. So how do we understand value for customers? How do we then make the choices around how work should flow? And that's often a lot about what to combine, what to keep separate, what to link, which we've got a tool to help doing with that. And then thinking about what are some of the building blocks, both from a structure, accountability, system perspective, and then how do we drill down into detail of how that's going to work, and then test around it. And just to show you some of the key tools that we will spend time on. So there will be other tools that I will refer to, but these 6 will have breakout sessions on tables in the session, really to practice using these because they're so important. So the first one is a particular technique for creating design principles which translate strategy into operating model implications. And they're typically done at the start of a project and then guide design choices through the process and can be used to evaluate at the end. Secondly, this value delivery chain mapping tool. And the simple idea here is that you look at the value chain for each customer value proposition or customer segment separately and lay them all out separately and understand what are the key capabilities or points of advantage in each of those. And then from a default position of keeping them all separate, you go through a process of figuring out where it might make sense to combine them in a way that won't destroy some of the inherent value in those activities. So very powerful technique. And for me, once you've done this, it starts to give you the underpinning logic for the operating model. Just the operating model canvas that I've talked about, and we'll play around with that, particularly around visualization. So how do you visualize the whole? Number 4 here is a particular technique for looking at organization model or organization structure. So the pitch here would be that most organization design focuses on the boxes and doesn't focus on the lines, which are the relationships. And actually, it's the lines that quite often cause problems in organizations. So there's a particular way of describing the lines and talking about the different types of relationships and how power manifests itself within that. So we talk about support work and operating work and different types of support work and the relationships between them all. So again, quite probably a little bit different than things that people might have experienced in organization design, but super powerful in my experience. Number 5 here is this rapid model for decision making. So again, in my experience, decision making can be difficult in many organizations. So who has decision rights can be unclear, or who has a role in a decision can be unclear. So rapid's a simple model that defines the different roles people have in a decision. And again, not all roles are equal. So this again gets back to being clear on who holds what power. And unfortunately, when we don't make it clear, that's when we cause confusion and end up with operating models that aren't very effective. And then the last tool on here is one of the testing tools. So there's others. This is a relatively simple one with 9 simple tests that looks at fit tests. So how well does the operating model fit with the strategy? And then design tests, which is really looking at some of the good design principles around that. So again, we'll play around with that. So what to expect, just to kind of wrap up, my focus is on practical tools rather than theory. And the idea is if the tools are right and they embed the theory, that's the best way to teach it and to equip people to go and be effective practitioners. Secondly, we will learn through doing as far as we can. We're in the confines of a 2-day workshop. So there will be an opportunity to practice these key tools and learn from doing that. Thirdly, I will share war stories and practical examples. My ambition is we make this interactive, so you'll get a chance to learn with and from other attendees and also with me. So this isn't going to be 2 days of me talking at you. I will introduce concepts, introduce tools, give you a chance to try applying them, and we'll sort of debrief, understand what worked well, what didn't. Really is a way of helping you learn how best to do operating model design. So that's what I wanted to cover in terms of an overview. I'm going to pause. We've got 10 minutes or so, so very happy to answer any questions that you might have about what I've covered, about the 2 days, about operating model design. So yeah, really some time just to take your questions.
Well, thank you, Mark, for taking us through the quick tour. Actually, 2 days and 30 minutes. Again, it seems that you have a lot on your belt in terms of tools and processes. I'm really excited to attend, so I'm just going to leave the questions for our audience here. I do believe you can guys just thumbs up if you have questions, and I will start like rolling the mic here. Carlos, go ahead.
Hi, Mark. Thanks so much for your time. I have a question about the testability of this framework and what kind of industries that this framework was efficient in its use to implement the strategies, and what would be the lifetime for such strategies developed through the operating model canvas.
Okay, great question. So it's the operating model canvas and the tools are industry agnostic, so they can apply for any industry, any business challenge or type of strategy, would be my view. I mean, you can think about it as a way of making sure that all the important aspects have been considered and the relationships between them. So it isn't in itself an operating model design that you could go and implement. It's a framework for how to think about it and how to populate the kind of operating model design. And I can bring examples of that kind of top level canvas and how it's been used in different industries, different sectors, at business unit level, enterprise level, for different functions. So it can be applied in different ways, at different levels, and different places. I think your second question is more interesting. So, what's the lifetime of a design that you would come up with? And it depends how you design it. So clearly, we're in a world where change. It feels like change is getting faster. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it certainly feels that way. And organizations need to have a level of adaptability or agility, so to sense what is happening in the outside world and to be able to respond and react to that. And many businesses have therefore designed in flexibility to their operating models, so it is easier for them to, change priorities or redeploy resources. So in a way, that becomes an input into the operating model design. So how flexible do we want to be? Because quite often flexibility has a cost. So we can make a conscious decision around how flexible, or perhaps where we need to be flexible, and design that in, and recognize there might be other areas in the operating model that we think will be more fixed, and we're happy to fix them because that might drive scale economies potentially. So these things in a way fall out of the strategy analysis that should give some clarity around the environment that the business is going to operate in, and if there isn't a view of how flexible, how long-lived does this need to be, then those questions will be asked relatively early on in the operating model design process to get clarity on it, so you can design something that will last, or has the flexibility to adapt and last in that way as it needs. Does that answer your question, Kiros?
Yes, thanks so much.
Great answer, Mark. Anyone else has questions? All right, so if no one else has any questions, I guess this would be it for tonight. Thanks, Mark, again for this amazing 45 or 41 minutes. And looking forward to see you next week, and hopefully see the audience again. We have already lots of seats booked, and I guess we're moving to a bigger room a little bit because we're getting a last-minute booking as well from a lot of banks and businesses and strategy teams and individuals actually. So looking forward for our next week, inshallah. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and see you again soon, inshallah.